And I will continue now in English,
okay.
So maybe it's more practical thing. So, U.S. economist Danny Roderick, in its groundbreaking work "Globalization Paradox," made a very interesting statement. He basically claimed that, or argued that globalization, democracy, and national sovereignty are fundamentally incompatible. It would be possible, I quote, either to contain globalization in order to strengthen democratic legitimization, or to restrict democratic decisions in the interest of higher competitiveness. Do you agree? And my question to you is, do you agree with this statement? If so, how do you see our so-called European way of life? Because EU is basically a part of the globalization process. Our European way of life can be kept at all in the long run. In the same time, the union can be kept intact and sovereignty sort of protected country on the national level.
Well, I argued first of all that union is necessary if we want to retain our sovereignty. This is the instrument of augmenting our sovereignty so that it counts for something in the globalized world. Now, whether globalization and sovereignty and democracy are compatible, it's comparing sort of different phenomena. It's a bit like asking, is hurricane and unleaking roof compatible? No, not really, but we have to sort of, to weather hurricanes and then build new roofs which are sort of stronger and less leaking. So globalization is not something that we can create, regulate, and end, sort of turn off at a will. It's the conditions in which we have to adapt ourselves, and it's a big challenge, I think, for first of all for both for national states and for the European Union, how to be rapid, fast, rapacious, adaptive, dynamic in these very difficult conditions where everything changes. It's like ocean, nothing firm here. So our state structures, which are kind of carry on as though we have all the time in our life, are not adequate to this. So it's a big challenge. But the question is not can we turn off globalization? No. The question is whether we will survive or not. And lots of civilizations have collapsed in our it's a question for us whether we will do necessary changes so that ours doesn't yet.
Yeah, I think that we have two challenging systems for European way of life. One is Islam and second one is Chinese Confucian communist capitalism. And Islam is quite often seen very dangerous, but I'm not so sure because actually it's part of Occidental culture. It's one of the monotheisms, and it is not so strong. But Chinese culture, that's a real challenge, I think.
Võib-olla on saalis küsimusi? Jah, palun.
I very much enjoyed both of your talks, and I would like to ask actually something that I think relates to two of these speeches, because when Dr. Ehrenruth was criticizing the concept of freedom, I was just asking, what do you want to have instead of it? Because I think wouldn't it be possible that freedom, when we take Isaiah Berlin's negative and positive freedom, already is including this part that you were stressing is important, that there will be not only freedom from something and liberty to do things, but also to have meaning in your life, to do really valuable things, valuable projects. So this positive liberty, this is my question, couldn't this already include this meaning? When I just came yesterday back, just to give an example, came back from Brussels via Finnair, and in Finnair board journal I saw Frank Mandela's quotation that was used speaking about Finnish happiness studies, saying that happiness is something that happens to you when you are doing meaningful things. I think it's a lovely sentence, and would this correspond to what you are saying? But my more basic question then comes actually, if this, and I sympathize with your criticism to the well-being studies and considering happiness only in terms of enjoying or having subjective happiness and having more hedonism, this is, of course, should be criticized. But the question can be, if we include then meaning, actually what kind of meaning is then that we are looking for? Europeans and European lifestyle is much more hedonistic. The church has less importance. We are not taking care of kids. I mean, fighting for country's independence makes one happy, but if it is not anymore something that we are doing, people are feeling less engaged and things like this. But we see the more and more actually people looking for some greater meaning, and then sects get more importance. I mean, suicide bombers clearly have meaning in life. They seem to be very happy. Is this something we suggest should come instead? And if not, what is this European lifestyle with meaning, with some positive liberty that we would like to have more? Thank you.
Well, there was a lot of questions and very good ones. Thank you so much. What about happiness? The problem with happiness is that we can achieve it. We can have it. So after we are happy, that's enough. The development stops. So I think that happiness is not a good goal for any culture, because you can achieve it. So the goal should be unattainable, and righteousness and this kind of ethical goals are not possible to attain. There is always something you can do more better. And that is why when there in the culture, when there is this kind of ethical goal, as it has been in the Western culture, it makes the culture dynamic. It makes it, to my eye, the winning culture of the world. So I would like to see Western culture as a winning culture of the world, because other ones are, to my eye, not so good ones. So that is my basic idea, to put it simply. But there was this other part of the question about do I like suicide bombers or not? No, I don't. But
meaning is valuable, because the question, is it like only objectively valuable goal, which we consider, because doing good, I think I very much sympathize with your point that it should be, instead of living well, we should be doing good things. And of course, Aristotle's eudaimonia includes doing good things, having virtuous character, having values of common good. I mean, but then we need some kind of objective happiness theories or objective judgment of what is a valuable goal. We can't say, because for suicide bombers and any sect believers, this is subjectively very valuable. They are doing something that they feel has very big meaning. But
they are breaking the ethical law, so it cannot be good.
This is where
it cannot be good.
Okay, so ethics should come in play.
It's obvious it cannot be good, so no use to talk about it, I think.
Okay,
so we must see that in culture it's included this kind of ethical evolution. If you look, for example, ancient Greek and Roman cultures, they didn't have concept of conscience. It was only its meaning was only to have some kind of consciousness of your own mind. But there was no this kind of ethical point that you are feeling guiltiness if you kill your enemy or something like that. Now we have, after 2,000 years, we have this kind of conscious which is inside of us, and we think that every healthy human being feels this kind of guilty when he or she does some kind of bad things. I think this is a good example and simple example that there is really this kind of ethical evolution, and I see this kind of progress in culture which is valuable, and this is the basic for my values.
Okay, I thank you very much, and I of course agree that ethics should come in play, and this is something that from the ancient Greek we could say that if one is not yourself just, you can't have a good life. I mean,
but the problem is with eudaimonism is that it's conventional. It's the same problem with Aristotle. That the virtues, they are conventions, and what is when something is convention, it cannot progress. It's based on the society. It's not the critical. There is no critical point of view. But if the ethics is based on the critical individuals, then you can be ethical without being happy. Actually, Kant said that is quite often the case when you strongly when you are strongly ethical, you are in the contradiction with your some kind of society or conventions. That's quite often the case. It doesn't mean happiness, but it means that you do the right thing.
Okay, but when you go further, I mean,
I have suggestion now. Let's take some more questions maybe
Thank
from
you.
the floor. Yeah, go ahead, back there.
European way of life, in a sense, we have common grounds on certain topics. Let's say we split the way of life into two. One is economic values, another is ethic, moral questions. So you said before that Europe has been strongest when it's based on common values. But we see a real difference between, let's say, we can find a common ground on economic questions much more easily than moral and ethical based ones. So, for example, if you take human rights questions and all that, then they're usually layered. How much you mentioned the LGBT communities and all that, and is it worth looking for common ground in those questions, or should we only focus on the European way of life in an economic sense?
That was the question for Matti.
No, I think that the whole point of my talk was that in order to develop a sort of a common political will, it has to bring into the foreground what you call ethical values. I would beg to differ a little bit about sort of the fact that you can talk about economic values per se. I mean, economic values is sort of just how much it costs, basically. There are values of the marketplace, the sort of the social and ethical values without which the market model could not exist, such as justice and disinterestedness and things like that. But they are part and parcel, I think, of the same sort of ethical package. And I think it's very important to underline just that economic methods of operation left on their own without the ethical background and without the sort of the framework in which to operate can lead to great sort of tragedies. I mean, sort of what Chinese are doing sort of in Africa is free markets sort of without minus ethics. I think, but we should not limit just to the values which ensure the functioning of the economic model, but also go further. But then again, not to legislate on the minutiae which are part and part of the national culture. I think that's also very important to really understand what values are prerequisites to maintain the free society, rule of law, and things like that. But not to say that no, the Irish cannot do that. Sort of the Poles have to behave the way that the enlightened Czechs do. So that's, I think, would be unnecessary.
But I continue with the same question basically, and the claim that since Brexit, actually in Europe we haven't learned a thing. A few weeks ago, a new financial framework was released by European Commission, which basically plays with a very dangerous idea of punishing financially member states who are not fully implementing or are not fully sharing our values. The way how Brussels was behaving during Brexit talks with London. It's basically the Brussels was trying to take London into knees, big time. We take you down completely. Now, new wunderkind in Europe, French President Macron is again putting up further federalization ideas on the table. So just using those, or taking those three samples, I would claim that we haven't learned the thing. I mean, do you see that if we continue behaving in a very similar way, Europe has the only chance to further this integration?
That I suppose, well, I'll have a crack at it first and then sort of pass it on. But the sense is very strong that there is no humility derived from the fact that one of the strongest states has left and is irrevocably committed to leaving the Union. There is, in fact, a bit of Schadenfreude yeah, right, serves them right, and looking at the woes especially sort of, and there is a sense of glee, which I think is totally inappropriate. And at some point we will have to talk about the responsibility, not only of someone like Cameron. About Cameron, there is a sort of in Lithuania folk tale about a king who goes on a war, and then in order to win he promises something that he hasn't left at home, and then comes back home and realizes that's his daughter, which was born when he was away. So Cameron likewise promised something that he thought he wouldn't have to deliver on, the referendum, and then lost it. But so at some point historians will have to talk about the responsibility of Donald Tusk in actually sort of being absolutely idiotic about Cameron's proposals. And which pushed sort of the referendum in the way that it went, and blind walkers, I think is so. Yes, I'm for. But then again, sort of, what is punishing? I think sort of there is a point. There comes a point when saying, if you subscribe to a certain set of values, and I'm talking here about Hungary, well, you are no longer the part of the community of values that we formed. And maybe you should consider your membership in the club. And that I think is a relevant point. So in a sense, we have to be, and there is no clear principle that we say that no, sort of all national sort of peculiarities are welcome. No, not quite. I mean, sort of there are values, but they have to be limited. They have to be clear to everybody. They have to be fundamental. They cannot be just whims of some Brussels officials that I want this value installed, to which everyone has to subscribe in order to be members of the club. And that I think is sort of punishing just because you don't like a certain arrangement. I think is a very good example of lessons not learned. So yes, we have to learn the lessons of Brexit with great humility.
Would you like to elaborate? Any other question from the? Yeah, please go ahead.
It's more of a comment in the sense that what the earlier references were to hedonism and who are we, and we're forgetting our identity and that kind of thing. And then the mention of the Italian wearing the Putin T-shirt. This is where Mr. Putin has been extremely clever, presenting himself as a bastion of Christian values, of proper things, of being opposed to all this degenerative weirdness from the West, and that stick with me and we will have this good kind of moral milieu that many people are hungering for. And it has caused a great deal of confusion among people that claim to be conservatives, thinking, well, there's this strong man Putin. He's standing for these values. We may not like everything he does, but he's standing for those values. So I think there is, he has known how to exploit people's confusion and unhappiness with much of what is going on.
Okay, thank you. Maybe, as you mentioned, Putin, actually it was in Urmas Reinsalu's speech where he was kind of worried about the fact that EU with its 500 plus million population is losing ground on the global scale. But between almighty China, the future's almighty China, and the EU, we have Russia with only 145 million people, I believe, and the biggest landmass on the planet. What kind of long future you see for Russia on this big global power play?
Yes. That Putin case brought to my mind. I was about 1 year ago. I was here in Tallinn because one of my books was translated in Estonia, and one of my discussants told me that his view that actually people of Russia are not supporting Putin because they believe in him or believe what he's saying and believe that he has any kind of values, but from cynical point of view. Mm-hmm. They think that he has the power and he's strong enough, and that is why he is best for the Russia, because there is, as we know, there is no any kind of tradition of democracy in Russia. So they cannot believe in democracy. They never had that.
But whether with democracy or without, there is a huge landmass, an empty space, and there is an old saying that no empty space stays empty for a long time, because somebody will move in. It's just a question who and when.
You mean after Putin?
Yeah. No, even together with Putin, I mean.
Yeah.
The whole Siberia is an empty,
you think it's empty. Okay.
People-less landmass.
Maybe it's not empty. Maybe it's not empty.
Well, the kind of wisdom of the ancients would dictate that, the enemy of my enemy is a friend, and the Chinese designs on Siberia should therefore be sort of, tolerated, or at least sort of, mock, despairingly sort of said, oh, it's impossible to do anything. But I think that would be a tragedy. I think that sort of, would be any territorial aggression on Siberia would be, in terms of rule of law and international order, would be a tragedy whenever that happens. But I'm not a wizard, sort of with a crystal ball. I only believe in the kind of future that we can create, and I truly believe that we can have, and therefore we must strive for democratic Russia. And it's not a sort of, it's not when Putin finally dies, sort of. It's not, I think it's maybe much further away, but if we gear ourselves to a long perspective, then it can come much sooner than we think. And as an example, almost exactly 30 years ago, I was a 15-year-old sort of dabbling a little bit with dissidents, in Vilnius sort of area. That was spring of '88. March, I think, and I asked a dissident, somebody who spent all his life sort of fighting for Lithuania's independence, sitting in 12 years in prison, still alive actually, and said, so what do you think is going to happen? Sort of me as a sort of young acolyte asking this authoritative old person, sort of, what is going to happen? And he says, look, my dear, if everything goes well, if there is no backlash after Gorbachev like there was Brezhnev after Khrushchev, then maybe in 2010 we might have a satellite status like Poland today. 2 years later, Lithuania was independent. 4 years later, it was in the United Nations. So, when you gear ourselves to long-term project, but then you have to think very fundamentally, okay, how can you reach the Russian psyche? Yes, they haven't had a prolonged period of free society. They had sort of spasmodic but how can you reach, how can you talk to them? How can you translate values in the language of those things that appeal to them, which are sort of vital to them? Then sort of, I think you have makings of a successful transition, and not a kind of, top-down sort of superficial democratization that was happening in the 90s. But I think we have to work for that and see how it goes. It might be sooner than we think.
That's a very good point to make end to this panel. I'm afraid our time is up, so that we all need to be harsh with Putin, but at the same time, representing all the countries, we all keep fingers crossed that our neighbor will be a normal, peaceful country again one day. So thank you for excellent panelists. Thank you.
kord suur tänu Mart Luigele ja veel kord suur tänu kõigile vestlusringis osalejatele. Many thanks to the panelists.